Well, after 2 days huddled in Toronto, the Prime Minister emerged from his cabinet planning forum with the beginning of a plan he says will transform Canada's economy.
Our relationship with the United States, so essential for so many industries, was once one of our greatest strengths, and in many cases, in certain sectors, has become a vulnerability. Given that we can't control what other nations do, Canada's government is focused on what we can control. And that means building our strength at home, building Canada strong.
Well, to build Canada strong, there's billions of dollars to help industries and workers hit hardest by tariffs, a new Buy Canadian policy, and a pause on the electric vehicle mandate. So, as it's Friday, there's a lot to unpack with our party insiders. We got Greg McEachern, he's a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. It's good to see you all from my regular perch. It's been a while.
It's David.
Yes. Cochrane, not common. He was here at the beginning of the summer. Look, Greg, billions more as thousands more lose jobs, right? It just speaks to the moment the economy is in, the country is in, and the government is in. What do you make of this sort of building blocks to a bigger industrial transformation?
Well, let's talk timing, because the House is coming back on the 15th. The Prime Minister is coming out of a 2-day cabinet retreat, and then in Edmonton, the Liberal caucus will be meeting, I think, the 9th to the 12th.
A bunch of projects will be announced next week. It seems,
exactly,
right?
and there's been some significant recent announcements as well about the massive projects office and who's in charge of that, and the person that was named. Like a couple of the appointments that the Prime Minister has done, very interesting. You see praise from both, the right and the left on this, and the center. So all of these are kind of are leading up to this, because I think, they have to be aware that the advisors around the Prime Minister have to be very aware that one of the big issues in the waning years of the Trudeau administration was whether they were obviously aware of the impact of inflation, but communicating to Canadians that they were aware was where things sort of fell down or did fall down. And I think what you're seeing here, I went to a conference in the late spring where there were people from the grain industry, and I remember talking to them about canola. That has been something that's been on the radar for a long time. And I think yesterday or the day before, you were interviewing with Premier Moe, and he was talking about how he was pleased about this direction. And this is someone who's not usually all that favorable to Liberal Prime Ministers.
Yes.
So I think, overall, there's a big umbrella here of being, we saw some really bad job numbers today from here and the United States. So all of that is in the lead up to the House coming back.
Yeah, Mel, I think it's very clear every time the Prime Minister speaks, he's got a good understanding of the moment in terms of the consequences of what Donald Trump is doing. But you saw things today like the EV mandate pause, and they're going to come out with a new strategy on climate competitiveness. You got a lot of climate, advocates, would have been big supporters of the Liberals last decade. Yep. Very anxious. Like there's an interesting friction developing as you deal with one problem and move a little bit away from another.
Right. And while that's, maybe a trend coming from the United States, it's actually not a trend in the rest of the world, right? The rest of the world is continuing to move ahead on climate policy. So it is, maybe a response to what's happening in the United States, but a bit of a step back. And I think there's also the other thing that maybe isn't talked about as much in the climate kind of world is there is a massive opportunity there to create jobs. So when you have the numbers that we're seeing today, it's maybe not the best for folks exactly in that world who have been allies of the government for a long time. And when I worked for the party, it was always really hard to get folks who are in the climate space to work with you because they had such a good relationship with the Liberal government. So seeing how that plays out will be interesting. But the other thing that I maybe had a hard time internalizing today is because there was so many things that were being touched in the Prime Minister's announcement, it kind of felt a little bit hard to figure out how regular folks were going to be helped or how regular folks were going to see support or how this was going to, or what this was going to mean for them in a real way. That is maybe the other thing that I think you're right. The Prime Minister has a good pulse on what's happening, but I think because they're doing these big ideas and they're not going to be delivered anytime
Macro.
soon. Yeah, it's very here. So I don't know how you're, supporting me in a day-to-day. I don't know how this is going to help me with my groceries that are a little bit more expensive, with my neighbor that's, lost his job. So yeah, he has a good understanding of the economy and what needs to happen, maybe, but I don't understand how that's going to make my life better. And I think that's what was maybe missing a little bit today.
Yeah, I mean, Fred, there were things with EI, longer benefit terms for long tenured workers might lose their jobs, a reskilling, retraining program for 50,000 people. But that speaks to the disruption, right? That there's it's important to do these things, but it's mitigation.
Look, the biggest thing that happened today is that everything happened at once. There was this massive announcement with so many things. We're touching on all these different parts of the plan that came out today. Typically, you roll this out one day at a time over, I think you could probably do 2 weeks of announcements that they did in one day.
It's not how he does things.
No,
it's usually on a Friday, and it's usually a lot.
But it's fascinating politically on, and to your point, how does this trickle down to people? How do they understand this? How many people heard the EI thing that you just mentioned? How much did they actually get from that? Because there's so much to cover tonight. Nightly news, when people are watching the National, what are they getting out of that? How much of this can you cover? What are you going to see in tomorrow's papers and how many days? I think the communications of it is interesting. I think ultimately the most important thing is this plan going to work? Is this going to protect jobs and protect Canadians? And that remains to be seen. Obviously, we're going to see what projects are announced and when they are, and hopefully this does work. And I will say it's interesting they put the EV thing out today. Clearly that was something you put in as a document dump, just try to hide that news, it felt like.
I think that's going to be one of the big headlines out of this, though. Totally. You know what I mean? I don't know if that's going to hide.
May have been hoping that it wasn't.
Right.
That this maybe that they could kind of sneak that in during this massive announcement. And I will say, to your point, Mal, the Liberals, they are a centrist government right now, maybe even a little center-right under Carney. There is this left progressive flank that they're exposing themselves right now on, which could be interesting.
Yeah, on the EVs, I spoke to someone today that works in the energy field, and they were telling me that we should not have been surprised as soon as Trump dumped the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a big hallmark of the Biden government. And I spent a lot of time on panels talking about how it changed everything for Canada and what we had to match and what we had to do. Once Trump pulled out of that changed the equation just because of the size of Canada and geographically where we are, and that we should not have been as surprised. But to both your points about communicating this, that might have been something that you wanted to have out there and have people start to be prepared for. As you said, I think, China's still going to go ahead, in this direction. Where does that leave Canada? That's perhaps a conversation that they could have been planting a little bit in the last couple of days.
But on that, there's a lot of pushback that even in difficult times, you want to have that EV mandate because it does send a signal to the market that you are going to go in this direction over the long term, right? And that is one of the challenges. But you sort of understand it to a degree because the auto sector has been the sector most directly targeted by Trump in an almost predatory way beyond the tariffs, and they're the border has become like a massive problem for them now. So they can't afford extra cash outlay. But the other thing I'm hearing from the industry is a lot of them have already bought credits, and they can't get them back because who sells 100% electric vehicles? Tesla. And Elon Musk doesn't give refunds. So a lot of money has gone from Canadian automakers to the guy who enabled Donald Trump to get in there right up to this point, and now they've moved away from the mandate.
Totally, and we actually had heard that, right, when we had started hearing rumors about what Trump was going to get rid of first. There are so many organizations that have planned for this, and then you got to go back to the drawing table and kind of redo plans, right? So all that business planning also. But again, I'll go back to my earlier point is if this is an opportunity to, become a real player in this field for Canada, why not continue down that path and seize the opportunity, particularly when you've got a massive player who just pulled themselves away from the table.
Yeah,
right?
we had Don Drummond on the show the other day, wrote a paper for CD Howe, and he says there's real opportunity in clean tech for growth. So, we'll see if the private capital goes there. Fred, though, we did see today, I'm going to go back to one of your favorite words, and that's narrative. We did see a series of measures to sort of stop the bleeding and offer some support to key sectors. Next week, it'll be the projects. right? And then after that, at some point, we'll see the budget. Now, a blend of austerity and investment, we'll have to see what that looks like. But these are like 3 significant acts on the economic front for the Carney government to tell a story.
Right, and I'm going to slightly sound like I'm contradicting myself here while not contradicting myself.
Oh,
when
we'll
I
see.
said that, when I said about how there's one big massive announcement that could have been done over 2 weeks, I actually think this could be the way to do it because my experience when running campaigns, you put out a big platform, you put out a big pledge, no one's reading the platform. They want to know, do you have a plan? No one's actually reading what's in the plan, what's trickling down, what's what all of the goodies in there. They want to know though that you're thinking about it, that you're worried about what they're worried about. And if they can communicate that, and if they can come out with the projects, and if we can start seeing stuff moving, I think there will be a lot of trust built up through this.
It's interesting though to see the $5 billion there, Fred. Like that's billions more on top of the billions already spent. It's loans and credit. And you hear Flavio Volpe talking today from the Auto Parts Manufacturers Association that this is credit that the auto companies may need to take advantage of because they're having trouble getting bank loans. I mean, imagine a situation where the big automakers and their parts suppliers are having credit troubles. That's where it is.
Well, that's the turmoil that this country faces due to our neighbor to the south. That could destroy our number of our industries. So it is, and that was interesting with the major project office having that extra thing, not just approving projects, but helping get capital for them as well.
So, Greg, I'm sure they're talking to you hourly, daily about the budget, right? About what's coming. The austerity plus investment. There's a lot of money put on the table today. There's going to be stuff with the projects next week. I mean, where do you see a potential challenge with this financial agenda coming? Because they were asked to go into this cabinet retreat, lay out 15% savings to start rolling out over the next couple of years. That's the difficult bits of governing, right? That they're going to have to deal with. Announcing projects is good stuff. Announcing cuts is bad stuff. I mean, how do they navigate this in the next couple of weeks?
I think it was your power panel yesterday. I was driving from between here and the East Coast. Spent a lot of time in the car the last couple of days, and so I can't remember which day what was said. But they were talking about how it might have been your journalist panel last night that the austerity, is it actually austerity in terms of overall reduction, or are you, because of the situation that Fred just referred to, because of President Trump, are you borrowing from Peter to pay Paul? Yes, they're. I thank the government of Canada. They got our country through the pandemic. A lot of bureaucrats, did a lot of hard work. But, do we need the same number of employees that were hired to address health issues during the pandemic? And the size of the government, when you hear about the percentage increases, it's a lot. So there will be, places where that's taken away from. And perhaps in a normal time, that this would have been an overall reduction. But what the Prime Minister just talked about today, what Fred just mentioned about Donald Trump, what we see every night, there has to be some investment. I mean, we cannot leave our canola farmers out on a limb to swing in the breeze. We can't do that.
I get that, but fiscal space is fiscal space. And we're talking about maybe a $90 billion deficit this year, right? According to what we've seen from CD Howe. That can't continue, right? The deficits during COVID, there's an argument for it because some provinces couldn't borrow and the need was great. But there's not a lot of space, right?
Yeah,
so they've got to do a reduction at some point.
And I think in your interview with Don Drummond, that's what he talked about, that, there are some fiscal guardrails there that we're not up against, but we're at the point now where we are looking at, what is going to be inherited by, the generations to come. And it's a massive amount. I think they really, we see in polling that Canadians do not seem to be, they're seeing the Trump and the tariffs you're seeing that move down as the number one issue. But I think it's also if inflation is number one, why are we still facing inflation? Why? It's because of things like Donald Trump.
Yeah.
We still have a war.
It's the consequences of Trump rather than the annexation threat.
We still have the war in Ukraine and Russia with the implications on supply chains and energy costs, right? None of these things have actually gone away. They've just come, piled on top of each other. You're absolutely right. It's a huge challenge. The communication, as Mel referred to, this is where I think they need to, if this is a big umbrella statement today, this would be a good time to start to talk about pieces of it and how, as you said, how this is going to affect me as an average Canadian.
But Mel, it's interesting, some of the money they move around, and it's not even going to really start until the 2026 budget, right? But I think we'll get a directional sense maybe in the budget next month, should we get it. a lot of these things that the government has announced at this point, they've done outside of Parliament, or they've done at like meetings with the premiers. To actually get the money to do these things, they need Parliament, and there's no Jagmeet Singh, this time round. So how do they navigate that? Like the Bloc has been a bit ornery in the response to what they saw today. Pierre Poilievre is back, and he doesn't sound like a guy who's going to prop up Mark Carney. I mean, where do you think this goes when the House comes back?
It'll be super interesting. I'm just going to touch a little bit on the staffing reduction or the public service reduction. I think it's going to be way more than that, and I think saying that it's just going to be a reduction in public servants is misleading a little bit. But I have the privilege of working with people who have been around for a lot longer than I was born, who say that these are cuts that we will see. That we haven't seen in a really long time, that I would not have seen in my lifetime.
There's already a lot of contracts not being renewed.
Exactly.
Young
so that
workers
is
going out the door.
that is massive. And to your point about the government not necessarily communicating, it's almost like they're proud that it's going to be that we're going to have all these cuts in the budget, and I can appreciate a little bit because they want to reduce the spending. But at the same time, once people start seeing programs that they rely on, or programs that they need to go ahead, or we stop funding help for something like that, people are going to start to be upset. So I agree with you on the communication of what that looks like going ahead as it relates to Parliament. And I think the polling that we saw this week with the Liberals and Conservatives tightening, it kind of gives leeway to Pierre Poilievre to not work with him so closely. And when you're seeing stuff like people slowly not believe that Mark Carney's the man with the plan, or slowly not believe that Mark Carney can get the job done, I think the less likely you're going to see, the Bloc, the Conservatives, work with them. And unfortunately, like you said, the NDP is not there and doesn't necessarily have the numbers to make it work. Yeah,
there's a tightening between Liberals and Conservatives. There's still a pretty substantial gap between Carney and Poilievre on that choice, right?
Totally.
So, but
continues to go up for Poilievre.
But there's a lot of pressure. But
totally.
Speaking of Pierre Poilievre, after years of taking aim at the carbon tax, the Conservative leader has set his sights on a different government program.
Conservatives are calling on the Carney government to permanently scrap the temporary foreign worker program. The Liberals have to answer, why is it that they're shutting our own youth out of jobs and replacing them with low-wage temporary foreign workers from poor countries who are ultimately being exploited?
He's not just leaning into policy, it's also pop culture, as the Conservative leader also seems to be taking inspiration from American sitcoms as he debuts new attack lines on the Prime Minister.
This really has been, as I said yesterday, the Seinfeld summer for Mark Carney, a big show about nothing. George Costanza had this great episode where he had this fancy, high-paying job with a corner office, and he didn't do any work, like literally none, but he wanted to look busy. So he would storm up and down the hallways carrying file folders, and they kept paying him because he looked so busy. I have to admit, Mark Carney has looked really busy this summer. He's almost as busy and as useless as George Costanza.
Okay, that's a throwback, of course, Fred, to must-see TV, the Thursday night powerhouse lineup for NBC back in the day with Seinfeld. What do you make of this? I know there's been a lot of pieces and discussion over the summer about a shift in tone and a shift in style. That didn't sound like a shift in tone and style, just in reference. What do you make of what we're seeing from Pierre Poilievre now that he's re-elected and going back into Parliament?
I would say I'm concerned that he's going in the opposite direction of where I would like him to go. I think these are times when we need a serious leader, and I think he could play that role if he took it seriously. But like seeing that, making jokes, like if he has an announcement to make and he really believes in it and he's coming out against, I guess this wasn't about TFW, this was about Carney's announcement.
This was just his daily response to the announcement today, and that's where he went. Yeah.
Like make strong points, stand on those points, make a strong argument, explain to Canadians why you disagree or agree with whatever is in front of you right now. By making lame jokes, and he's been doing that a bit. I noticed a few weeks ago he did a press conference when he was saying about how he was joking that Carney's stealing his ideas, and he was like, "Steal my ideas, steal my ideas," and it was just like, you don't look serious when you do that. You're auditioning to be Prime Minister. Look the part that you want to get.
The contrast, though, it was stark today. I thought, Greg, like, the Prime Minister was laying out the pretty fundamental challenges and reorder the rupture and the disruption and those things, and then like Seinfeld references for a second or third day in a row. Like I don't know if it's just different tactical approach, reaching different audiences, but the two men could not be more different in the way they do things publicly.
Yeah, and keep in mind, people were incredibly engaged in 2024 and 2025, to the election, really engaged in politics. And the Conservative leader has to, be careful about always being out there. And this was one of the criticisms of him during the election. You never heard from anybody else on the team. Now, it was interesting this week, he did have another MP, Michelle Rempel-Garner, who, Toronto Star article in June of 2022, there was move to push her out of caucus for her criticism of other MPs. So that's an interesting angle there. But he does not sound serious, and the Seinfeld stuff is so old and so dated. It's a budget about nothing. It was a parliamentary session about nothing. Like I found a thread from Rob Silver in 2018 or 19 where he's gone through all these examples about how that should be done. I love Peter Julian, but I remember criticizing Peter Julian for using that probably 8 years ago. And as one of my more humorous correspondents on Twitter replied to me, well, maybe he's Costanza, Poilievre's Costanza, who got fired on Friday and showed up for work on Monday anyway. And maybe he doesn't want to go there. I wish I can't take credit for that. But it does not actually seem serious. And I think what they're also forgetting is that in 2024, the polls were so good and people were looking at the Conservatives as the government in waiting. This is the Prime Minister in waiting. And they got a lot of attention that way. Now, there's only so much, there's less and less media room. And the Prime Minister has had a lot of big announcements this week. And I think I've seen 3 media avails from the Conservative leader. The only one that kind of stuck out to me was about TPWs. And the reason I'm aware of that is because I grew up in rural and small town Atlantic Canada. And I know that, generally, immigration is needed. As a member of Parliament said to me, we cannot make immigration policy on downtown Toronto and asylum seekers. Some people, as you've said, David, in Newfoundland, I know in the north, there are jobs that people will not do, so they've got to bring in people.
Or there's no young people, or there's no people of working age, and there are labor market gaps that you got to deal with.
But the reaction to that announcement was pretty mixed at best.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. He does have a real good ability and instinct for identifying sleeper issues, right? And then turning them into something larger.
He also had polling on his side.
But there is no consumer carbon tax anymore.
Yeah, and he had polls on his side.
He is the key euthanizer of that policy. But I wonder though, Mel, because it is interesting that like today with the Costanza reference, it was reaction to what Mark Carney had announced. It's a flip from when he was driving the agenda and the government was responding to everything. Now, Mark Carney is very much the main character in Canadian politics. But what do you make of what we've seen? Because this is kind of a prologue leading up to the inevitable showdown between the two in the House of Commons, the first time since the leaders' debates. What's your sense of where politically this is going to go, where the currents are leading?
I think Poilievre was good driving the bus. He's not good at following it. He's not good at responding. That's not his skill. You talk about, it's almost like he's making a mockery of it, right? Like you talk about him not being serious or making too many jokes. It just feels, again, I'm going to go back to it. It sounds like somebody who's lost, who still doesn't know what to say or doesn't know what his narrative is or doesn't know where his place is really, and he's still trying to figure out what it is he can bring to the House or what it is he can bring to his party, what it is he can bring to the conversation. But he really doesn't seem like he's very good at responding to the news of the day. And you talk about audience when you're talking about Seinfeld. I didn't watch Seinfeld, and I'm 35. So imagine who you're dropping out of that. So that is like the joke that you made. I was like, that's great. Everybody laughed around the table. No idea what you're talking about. So that is
it's on Netflix. You can probably
appreciate it. I was more of Friends, but anyways. I
think they were on the same.
And even then,
for a while. No, I got you.
You're losing. You're losing. You're right. Like you're making jokes, but you're not landing with your jokes with everybody. So I think that's the other thing. And yeah, I'm just going to go back to it. It feels like you're not just not serious, but it feels like you're just making a mockery of it all. Like you're just trying anything that'll stick and nothing's sticking. And what is highlighted for me is that nothing's sticking instead of you're trying these things. So it'll be interesting to see what he looks like in the House.
Okay, something is sticking somewhere though, because I want to show you this data that we referenced earlier, the new data from the Angus Reid Institute that shows that voter intention has improved for the Conservatives over the summer and in the months since the election. 40% of Canadians say they would vote for the Conservatives in an election, compared to just 38% for the Liberals. The NDP is at 10%, so they're surging, Mel. The Bloc Québécois is at 8%. Now, that's similar to polling we saw by Abacus Data last month. Now, it's interesting, though, going back to the point I made that about the approval ratings, Mark Carney is still 51 positive, 41 negative. Pierre Poilievre is only 36 positive, 58 negative. So there's a brand strength there, Fred, but the leader gap is still pretty large despite all of this. So I don't know if that is just things reverting back to sort of after an election period, kind of how people feel about things, or if there's something more happening there.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a natural shift from the Liberals to the NDP. Like, there is that vote, a lot of people that typically always want to support the NDP.
That would actually account for the change, really.
It is.
42 to 38.
And when it comes to an election, that's when they have to really put it down. Who do you want as Prime Minister now? Do you want Carney, or do you want Poilievre, or whoever the NDP leader is in the next election, if they're a credible person? And that's going to impact those numbers. So it's absolutely normal to see a tightening right now at this stage. But yes, those numbers, the leader numbers, are the ones I'd be most concerned about on the Conservative side of things. Got to fix those, and I think they got to figure out how to do it. You got to change the tone. You can't be don't be the class clown if you want to be Prime Minister.
Go ahead.
Yeah, on that, like the class clown, or on the, lessons from the campaign, we, saw a story, was it last weekend or 2 weekends ago, about how he's going to change his image again, or change his style again to speak to women. Yeah. The mocking stuff, the not taking it seriously, the making jokes of everything, that just turns any woman I know off, right? It's like you're not, I'm having a hard time, you're not taking this seriously, you're making a joke of it. So yeah, I don't see how those leader numbers improve with the people that they need to improve if he doesn't change that tone or that style.
And there is a way to be funny and to do well in politics. Like, look at Doug Ford. He's folksy when he does it, right? Like, he poured out a bottle of Crown Royal this week, and clearly he doesn't drink, and you can tell because he had no idea how to pour the bottle out.
No, I know. There's no air coming in. It was just a glug.
He doesn't know how to do this. But that was charming in the way he did it, and it was about an issue, and he's trying to show and make an example of something. So there is a way to be funny but it's just this tone problem.
It's like trying to be cool when you're not cool. Like, you're just like, I
have no idea what you're talking about. Greg, any worry in Liberal land when you see, it's a top line number in a couple of polls? The Conservatives have moved back in first place, Liberals have moved in the second, but the leader advantage is enormous. And let's face it, I don't think there's an election coming anytime soon. So I don't know if it's just a reset of the mood, or how do you view it?
So we're doing this now, like 2 polls. This is we. Well, come on. I've been here for a long time, week after week after rope with dope. Yeah. Come on.
So
I find there's differing messages where that I kind of find amusing, where the Conservatives say he's stealing our ideas, but in the same breath, he's horrible. He's the worst Prime Minister ever, and this is terrible. Like, the rhetoric today is so ratcheted up. And again, like, we were told in July that there was going to be a tone change. The little dig, the Costanza one, did not seem like something that adults would say. I've heard other, not my favorite Conservative here, but I've been on panels with other Conservatives in the last week where they talk about how because Pierre was tied up in the by-election, that's why Carney got away with everything this summer. And in the same breath, we'll talk about how many new MPs that they won. Well, what were they doing this summer then? So I find if the House comes back and the cabinet is able to think on their feet, or allowed to do that. I mean, keep in mind, one of the things that really, the Trudeau government in the first term with Sunny Ways, they would not respond in question period and remind the Conservatives that they were taking a position contrary to what they did in government. And once you learn that as an opposition member, it's free attacks, right? So the Sunny Ways thing didn't work. And Mark Carney's a lot of things, but I don't think he's Sunny Ways. If you're saying something wrong, he's going to point it out, and good on him.
Yeah, look, I don't talk about the polling because I think like the Liberal government is in free fall and collapse and all these things. But Mel, I do think it's interesting that we had an election in a context the likes of which, it was like a big snow globe that got shaken up. Yep. Things have settled a little bit inside that snow globe now, and the Prime Minister's numbers are still high, but there's an expectation shift now to delivery rather than just potential, right? And he seems intent on doing it, but I think that's what I take from a lot of the data we've seen is people like, okay, what are we actually going to see here?
Totally, and is it working? Is this the right approach? That's where you're starting to see kind of the numbers shift away from Mark Carney is, we thought he was the man of the plan. Is that turning into a result for me, or maybe did I, put my ex beside the wrong person? What I found interesting in the data in particular was the removing the tariffs. Was that a good idea or not a good idea? In the shift between good idea and not a good idea, I thought that was interesting. So seeing how that plays out and whether or not the other parties have anything to say on that, I think that'll be interesting, particularly because I think I was saying this last week or a few weeks ago of the people in my life are elbows up. They're still elbows up. They're trying to find Canadian products. They're trying to be mindful of where they're traveling. So when you're seeing the removal of that and you're not necessarily seeing a deal or you're not necessarily seeing a path forward to a deal, I think that will start maybe moving stuff away from Mark Carney. But again, if he comes with a deal or he comes with some good measures and the projects we see next week are stuff that people want, that could all change.
But Fred, just we got about 30 seconds. I'll give you the last word. But in the election, I think the prevailing belief was that Trump was punishing Canada to get something from Canada. I don't know if that's how people see it now, because he's done it to everybody. Do you know what I mean? Like, we all thought it was like a leverage, and it's like, no, this is just trade policy under Donald Trump. So does that change the political dynamic at all?
We figured out it's pure chaos under Trump.
Yeah.
It is going to look how this all comes together in the next year in terms of these projects and what's actually being built and what happens with the U.S., what kind of deals come together or don't, is going to impact Carney and his legacy and what his view of what Canadians' view is of him going into the next election, which could happen sooner than we think if Parliament is going to be as dysfunctional as I think it might be, particularly at the committee level, where it's the Conservatives and the Bloc are
they've got the majorities.
They team up over the last number of years. The NDP are not at committee this time, so the Liberals have no friends at committee. They can do investigations. They can stall legislation. There's lots. Carney may get sick of this himself and pull the plug. So.
Look, setting aside the politics, the domestic stuff that they can control as a government with the provinces and with the private sector, they got to make progress on that, or the economy is going to be in a really bad shape, and those 66,000 jobs will be nostalgic, if you don't recover from it. So on that happy note, you guys can go start your weekend. I got another hour of the show. Fred Delory, Greg McEachern, and Mel Richer. It's good to be back, gang. It's good to see you again.